Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending our event. Michael Connelly presents The Dark Hours in conversation with Ben Hobson. My name is Suzanne and I'm one of librarians from City of Parramatta Libraries, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land. I am currently on the lands of the Darug people, but wherever we are in Australia, we're meeting on land that always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. A former police reporter for the Los Angeles Times, Michael Connelly is the international best-selling author of 35 novels. He has created many genre-defining characters, including detectives Harry Bosch and Renee Ballard, crime reporter Jack McAvoy, and lawyer Mickey Heller. Michael Connelly's books have sold more than 80 million copies worldwide. They have been translated into 40 languages and have won awards all over the world, including the Edgar and Anthony Awards and the 2018 CWA Diamond Dagger, the highest honour in British crime writing. Our author, Ben Hobson, lives in Brisbane with his wife Lena and 2 children. He currently teaches English and music at a Brisbane high school. To Become a Whale, his first novel, was published in 2017, and his second novel, literary thriller Snake Island, was published in 2019. Ben also enjoys hosting book events for readers and interviews writers for festivals, bookshops, and libraries, and is a huge fan of best-selling author Michael Connelly. So welcome, Ben and Michael.
Hello, thank you, Christine. Thank you for having us here today. Very excited to be here with Michael. Michael, how are you? Welcome to New South Wales and Brisbane and all across Australia.
Well, I'm glad to be back virtually, at least. But either way, thanks for having me. It's exciting to be telling stories about my stories to people so far away. It's amazing.
Yeah. One thing that the pandemic has done is made it possible to do these sorts of events, so we can stream from our houses and then we can all interact with you and ask you questions. It's actually really cool. Really appreciative that you're here today. Really quickly, just off the top, I want to just say to our audience that if you do have any questions for Michael, there is the Q&A tab in Zoom if you want to click on that and actually give us some questions. I don't want to hog Michael all to myself. So if you do have some questions, I will be going to those questions throughout the course of our chat today. But I just wanted to start, Michael, how have you been going during this pandemic in regard to especially what you've been enjoying? So have you been enjoying any podcasts or books or movies or authors or anything like that? What have been your go-tos during this time?
You know, I think it's kind of interesting. I've watched probably more television than I have in maybe the whole 10 years combined. Before that, caught up on a lot of stuff. I have a 24-year-old daughter who came home, lived with us for a while, for probably about the first 6 months of the pandemic. And we almost had a routine of going through shows that we had missed or one of us had loved and wanted the other members of the family, my wife or myself or my daughter, to do it. So that became our routine. And then that was balanced by the writing. I'm involved in a couple of television shows that continued on and were filmed in a bubble. So there was still work outside of my house, but I'm not a full-time person on those shows. And so to me, it was a little bit of a return to the early part of my career when I was basically a homebody. I was locked down. I was voluntarily locked down, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
Because I wrote at home and I was on my own and things like that. So I think I might have been better prepared because of that experience of those years of just writing my novels and not being involved in any Hollywood stuff. And it felt like a return to that. So I have nothing, I can complain about when it comes to the pandemic, where obviously many people around the world had much more difficult times.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to mention too early on here, I saw recently that you've been running a charity auction. Is that right? Is that still going? And it's something to do with naming a character or something, right?
Yeah, there was, I think it just ended.
Oh no, we just missed it, did we?
Yeah, it was for it was a charity that provides homes and builds homes for veterans of the military who have fallen on hard times. And a friend of mine who's a news presenter started this annual auction. And so I contributed basically as I become a character in my next book. But I think that wrapped on Sunday. I'm not really sure. I agreed to do it, and then other people handle it for me.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, if it is out there, maybe go and see if you can search. But it's a pretty awesome idea. You get to have a hand in naming a character in a Bosch novel. Imagine that, a Michael Connelly novel. I mean, we're still reading your books after near 30 years now, right? So
I hope so. Yeah, but I do promise I won't make it a bad person or someone that you would be embarrassed by what the character does or anything like that.
I guess you do have a lot of power there, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's move to the Dark Hours, because it's really exciting. I just encourage you guys, if you haven't actually already picked up a copy of this book, I'm assuming everybody here listening to Michael is a huge Michael Connelly fan. But if you're not, or you haven't, picked up one of these, make sure you do. And it's an awesome, awesome book. Enjoy each of your books anew, like I've just read you for the first time. It never gets, because you've written 36 now, right? 36 whole novels. Yeah. And you'd think they'd be formulaic or you'd get used to what your style is. But no, every time I'm enjoying it like it's fresh. I guess I'm just complimenting you here, Michael.
It's a huge compliment because, you don't want to fall into that, into a routine. And, I try to, the main thing is I know that these characters from book to book can't be the same. Something's got to change. Yeah. Something new has to be revealed. And I think if you keep that in mind, you can do all right. You can have that fresh feel every time.
Yeah. And speaking of your characters too, I'd love to talk about Renee if we can. This is her 4th appearance. And this is Bosch's, and by my count, it's about his 23rd appearance. I went through, tried to count all the times. He might have had cameos elsewhere. I don't know, but
no, it's good to know because I've kind of lost track of that. Renee, I knew it was the 4th time, but
yeah,
I guess this is what happens when you kind of have all these characters pass through each other's books, But I'm glad to hear that Harry's been around 23. It's funny, in a month, basically in beginning of January marks the 30th anniversary of the first book being published. So
yeah, Black Echo, right?
Yeah, so 23 times in 30 years is not bad for Harry.
That's pretty good average. And he's still, there's a question here. Sorry, it's not actually a question. This is from Paul, and he just says it to you. It sounds like he's pleading with you. He says, "Don't kill Harry, please." That's all it says. So he still obviously very loves our Harry Bosch, but he's sort of taking a little bit of it's a different role in this book. Renee is really the prime person, the main character, I would say. The protagonist is Renee, and Bosch is almost like a supportive character. Do you feel like that sort of relationship will continue on through more novels as well? Because it was so engaging and interesting.
Well, yes, the relationship will definitely continue on. I think in literary terms, bringing Renee in is keeping Harry Bosch alive as a literary character because I've aged him in real time. And so maybe it's the former journalist in me, but I'm facing the walls of reality. I said he was born in 1950, so it's hard to, wrap your head around the idea that just 7-year-old guy's out there solving murders. But now that I have him in a role as a mentor, and he's kind of passing on his mission to Ballard, I think that keeps him around. I think that buys him more years. And so that's why we have this relationship. But I don't think the form of this book, as you've accurately put out, is it's a Ballard book and Bosch is a supporting character. There will be more Ballard and Bosch books, but I think I can switch that. It doesn't always have to be Bosch in the background and Ballard in the foreground. I can switch that around. I'm working on a book now where that is switched, that I would say it's going to be a Bosch book and Ballard's going to be in a supporting role in that story.
That's really exciting. You seem to really take a lot of delight in I guess structure in your books, right? You love sort of having an interesting like this is going to be a Renee book or this will be a Bosch book, but then this person will be over here. Is that the way you sort of attack your books when you're coming up with ideas?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I think in terms of what will be fun, what will be interesting and fulfilling over the 10 or 11 months it takes me to write the book. And this one, I just thought it would be interesting to put Ballard out there. It's a little bit of a switch. I had been switching narrations, like sometimes you're in Bosch's head, sometimes you're in Ballard, and this book is completely Ballard, and so you see her view of Harry Bosch, and that's fun to do. A lot of all this kind of stuff starts with the dialogue between characters. I like when they have their talks or their discussions, or they work out verbally what the moves are on an investigation. That kind of stuff I really love doing. And both characters have a great appeal to me in that way. But that's the kind of thing you can easily switch and put it in the POV or the view of Harry Bosch as opposed to Renee. So I just did Renee for this past year. So now I've moved on to Bosch's view of her.
Yeah, keeping it fresh. And talking about that too, that mentorship. I love Ballard. I love how authentic she feels and complex, but she does seem to possess that kind of Harry Bosch, like vigor for justice and for fighting for the downtrodden and the people who are normally at the fringes of society, like sticking up for the little guy. That sort of seems to be what drives her. And maybe Bosch is kind of passing that torch to her a little bit. Where do you draw inspiration from? Like, where are you finding all these interesting, complex characters, especially for Renee?
Well, it's interesting. You and I have talked about this before. Bosch is a character that's been inspired from a multitude of angles, from literary characters that I loved and inspired me, to real detectives I knew as a journalist, to movie and TV. He came from all over. And, I put it in a blender, mixed it up, and out came Harry Bosch. Ballard is completely different. She's a single source inspiration. There's a detective in the LAPD who has been helping me for a number of years with the Bosch books, but I didn't know. One time I was just having like a breakfast with her, and she talked about how she got into the being a detective, and she had to take the job no one wanted. That was working the midnight shift at Hollywood Division, nicknamed The Late Show. And so the more she told me about it, the more I realized I should write about this. And not only because I think it's interesting, but because I have this real life person who can keep me on the straight and narrow in terms of the authenticity of character, And so this detective's name is Mitzi Roberts. And she, I give her the drafts of my books, and she marks them up and comes back. And so she's a source that says, like, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't do that. This is how I would do it.
Wow.
This is what I would say to that guy. And so I have this authenticity being built into every draft of a book. And it's quite different from Bosch, because Bosch to me is an everyman. And Ballard is a solo, inspired and researched character.
You seem to love that idea, because I know there's a lot of authors who get extremely, like, I don't know a lot of authors who would send drafts of work to people and have the people mark it up and go, this wouldn't be quite what I would say, and then the author would actually accept that. Like some authors I know tend to be very, very what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe precious with their words, but you seem very collaborative. You love sort of gathering everybody's stories and bringing them in, right? Is that sort of what
I do? I think that's a good way of doing it. I cast a big net and bring stuff in. And I think I have a craft or a facility for figuring out what the good stuff is and what's the stuff I don't need. But I was also, a newspaper reporter for a long time, and you would turn in a story to an editor, and the next morning it might not resemble anything you wrote. Yeah. And so it kind of beat into you this idea that your words are not precious. So I would rather get something right and also have, it's not just I get from these detectives that help me, I get some great little windows that open up into their world. And that's like the fantastic stuff I get. But of course, if someone says I wouldn't do it this way, or I don't use that kind of language, I would say this instead. Why not use it? Because it just all adds up to, the authenticity of the piece.
Yeah, I totally understand. That makes a lot of sense to me. That's probably why your work is so consistently relevant to people. I do want to turn very quickly to a couple of questions from the audience. I do want to include them, Michael. We've got Gavin here. You've got a lot of questions, by the way. You have very enthusiastic fans. Gavin says, Harry feels so authentic, again on authenticity. He isn't a superhero, and I think that is what makes him so endearing. How do you go about making him feel as real as possible? We're just talking about Renee's authenticity. What is going into making Bosch as authentic as he is? Are you having people read it? What are you doing?
Yeah, no, I do the same thing. I have a very small cadre of 4 or 5 homicide detectives who and slowly they're moving towards being retired. In fact, only one is still active, and the others are retired in the last year or so. But they still know their stuff, and so it's the same thing I do with Detective Roberts. Read his stuff and tell me what you think. I just said I take those notes to heart and do them. But there is the writer part of this. I have to be very loyal. I have to be a slave to drama ahead of authenticity. So it's like a fine line. You want to grab the not 15 details of something, but maybe two telling details that make the reader know this is how it's done, or this feels authentic. And so that's part of it. That's like the finessing of getting great information from people who actually do the kind of work that you're writing about in fiction.
I really love that. I was thinking the other day about how in your books it's so authentic because the police actually do all the paperwork and things that actually are required for police work. But you never go on and on about all the details of that specific thing. Because like you say, it's not dramatic. It doesn't help the actual emotional arc of the story.
Right.
It's just knowing that he was doing that was what's important for authenticity. But then we move into the next dramatic conflict sort of part, right?
Correct.
One of my favorite things about your Bosch series is, and you mentioned this earlier, how you always set things in the present day. I love that you do that. And this book is set in our present day, and there are 2, I think, really, really important important to our whole world and all of our society. 2 big things that have happened over the course of the last year and a bit. And you do such a great job of having Renee meaningfully interacting with these 2 different ideas. The first, obviously, would be the global pandemic we've gone through. And so Renee, wears a mask and she's checking social distancing, and it's in there and it's layered, talking about vaccines and things like that. And even her living situation is different from the previous book. Was that sort of your process? You said her name was Mitzi, right? Did you sort of ask Mitzi how she was interacting with this sort of thing, or where did you find the space for that in the book?
I talked to Mitzi about all aspects of the books. But I've been doing this this is my 36th book. So I've been doing it for 35 books. The books are set in the year they're published, and they have a reflection of what's happening. It might be just what's happening in LA, but maybe it's happening in the whole world. I remember after I turned in a book, on September 1st, 2001. And it was in 10 days later, 9/11 occurred and the World Trade Centers were hit by terrorists and so forth. And I said, give me that book back because that doesn't make sense that Harry would not have any sense of this or feelings about it. So I've always done it. And so it's somewhat of a dilemma because it's been a tough year for everybody.
Yeah.
And do you want to escape into a novel and have that stuff in it? Do you want the pandemic in a novel that you might be trying to escape from pandemic and take a break. And then here it is in the book. So I realized that there's some readers who might not appreciate that. But I felt like I have to do it because I've been doing it for 30 years. And it just so happens that the past year it's been like a decade in 1 year with all this crazy stuff going on. A pandemic in my country, I'm sure it's news around the world, the George Floyd case where a cop was convicted of murdering a black man, and the protests that went through every major city in this country and others, including Los Angeles. It was like it was months long, and that leaves a mark on someone working here as a police officer, as a detective. And and then the capper on it was I was writing this book before it's set on New Year's Eve of 2020 into 2021. It's about the first murder of this year that occurs in Los Angeles. So I started writing it before that. I started writing it in November of last year. And so I'm well into this book. And then we have the attack on the US Capitol on January 6th. And so it's like, I'm already into this and I'm setting it this week. So I have to now include that. So there's a lot of big things that are referenced. I don't think in a big way. They're not plot oriented. It's like, this is how life is now. It's almost surreal with everything that's gone on in the last year. But that's what I do. And I knew it was a risk in terms of turning some readers off, that they didn't want to read a book where it was part of it. But I didn't want to change what I've been doing for 30 years in those ways.
Yeah, and I don't think you did. Like, it's such a light touch. It's just, this is the world. This is where we live. And it's not in a way where it feels like I'm swamped in a different way. It just feels real. Like I'm thinking about these things. Renee's thinking about these things. And I really love that in my books. Like, I love a character who's actually real, who feels authentic. I'd rather that than, a character or a book that's just avoiding everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it was, you kind of referenced this earlier. In some ways I could turn it into plot. And, we've seen Renee 3 times before. And what was odd or maybe unique about her, however you want to look at it, was that she would finish work at dawn and then go surfing and then sleep in a tent on the beach.
Yes.
And that maybe separated her from other detectives out there. But when the pandemic came around, all the beaches in LA County were closed. And so she couldn't even do that. So if I was going to be realistic, I had to take her off the beach.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, so now she's in an apartment and she's kind of living a life that many more people can connect to, the apartment and the nosy neighbor and all that kind of stuff. And so that to me was, okay, I can use what's going on to switch things up. Yeah. Which goes to your first question. You got to keep things changing, and so in that way, it was beneficial to me.
Yeah, totally understand that. Yeah, keeping things fresh. I've got a couple more questions from the audience here. I will go to a couple of them now. We've got Steve Melmer, who asks, how many hours a day do you attempt to write? And I actually had a question a bit later on, Michael, too, because I was talking with an author, Chris Hammer, in Australia, and we were both sort of in awe of, how did you get us 2 whole books last year? And then how did you do your podcast and your TV? Like, it just, I don't know how you find time in the day, but I guess, how many hours a day do you spend writing and coming up with your stories? How do you divide your day up?
I think the question should be, how many hours do I spend sleeping? And it's not very many. I'm lucky. I don't need a lot of sleep. And so what I try to do, like, the book stuff comes first. And if I can work from like about 5 a.m. till 10 a.m, 5 hours, that to me is a great day of writing, and I can get a lot done. And you're kind of like done with that part of your day as the whole city is just waking up and getting to work, because they start late in LA. And so my schedule in the last few years, because I've been involved in television shows, was to do that and then go to a writing room. Now, this is a place where the pandemic helped me, because the writing rooms became Zoom. So all I had to do, I didn't have to get in a car and drive to a studio All I had to do was jump on a Zoom, and that ended up giving me more hours or more writing time. And so I really benefited from that part of the pandemic. And, when I have two books come out in a year, it doesn't mean I wrote them in a year. Usually I have a book that I'm, nursing along with an idea, and then it comes together and I finish it and we stick it into the schedule. But last year, the first book was called Fair Warning, which was a Jack McAvoy book. And that was something I've been kind of working on for a while.
Yeah. And actually talking about that book, Fair Warning, not to go too further into, I don't want to spoil anything in your books because the journey of reading them is magic. So I don't want to spoil anything, but we do get into similar territory with, internet and the way we communicate and certain different misinformation and different like forums and things on there that people can go into some really dark places. And that's a big part of this book. What is your particular interest in that particular way of doing crime nowadays? It's such a modern way of interacting with the world and such a problem.
Yeah, it's hard to answer that question. I just kind of go with what interests me.
Yeah.
And okay, so again, you'll learn this in the first chapter of the book, so it's not a spoiler. But one of the main go-through lines of story in this new book is Ballard is searching for a pair of rapists. They nicknamed the Midnight Men, who work together, and that is such a rare thing that two people with the same psychopathy and compulsions would somehow get together and do this together. There's been examples over history, but they're very rare.
Yeah.
There's a big case in LA 40 years ago called the Hillside Strangler, but and it was a serial killer, and they all thought it was one person known as the Hillside Strangler. But when they finally cracked the case and made arrests, it was two people, and they had the same kind of aberrant sexual desires and again they were psychopaths. And to me, that is a fascinating idea. Like, how do these people meet? And nowadays, long after Hillside Stranglers, it would be in a digital meeting. It would be on the internet. It would be in the dark web.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to be a guy who writes messages or anything, or is heavy-handed in messages. But Fair Warning, as you said, and this book do have a connection in that that's where these kind of things can happen. And one of the detectives that has helped me with my books for many years also happened to be the LAPD's sexual crimes expert. And he wrote, he's referenced in the book, he wrote the surveys that sexual assault victims fill out and things like that.
Yeah.
And he was the one who told me about this. He actually gave me a paper that was written about by the FBI about these kind of tag team sexual predators. Wow. And and the idea that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. When these people meet and they have like views and desires, it's often 1 + 1 = 3. In other words, meeting someone can lead to acting out on these desires where someone alone might never act out on their desires. So all that was interesting, and that was kind of a starting point for the latest book.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other, you did mention very quickly, the other main, because there's sort of these two threads, two different crimes that sort of play back and forth over the course of the novel. But the other one is the one that involves Bosch. And like you said, and it's in the first chapter, so it's not a spoiler, but it was, and I didn't know this was a thing, but in LA, they shoot up into the air at New Year's. This is true, is it?
Yeah, it's so, when I do an interview with someone, I did one earlier today with people in the UK, it's like they can't fathom why this happens. And it's hard to believe, and I live here. And also, this is not the only American city where people do this stupid thing where they run out at the stroke of midnight on New Year's and shoot live ammunition into the air without the idea like what goes up must come down.
Yeah.
And there's all these studies that say that a bullet shot into the air, then when it falls, it doesn't have the same velocity as a bullet being shot at a person. So like you could get hit by a falling bullet and won't necessarily kill you, but every New Year's day, right after the stroke of midnight, there are all these reports of windshields broken and other damage and so forth from falling bullets. It's crazy. And so the book starts with Ballard. The book starts with Ballard underneath a freeway overpass, because she's basically taking shelter from what's going to happen. And that's true. The real detective, Mitzi Roberts, said that's what I used to always do on New Year's Eve.
Is hide because of the rain of bullets that might fall on. Yeah. That's so crazy. Didn't know that was a thing. But in the book, someone is very clever, and you don't really find out for a few chapters. So I'm sorry if I'm spoiling things here a little bit, but the idea of like cloaking a crime during that time, very, very clever. I love that.
It wasn't that.
Yeah, go on.
I wasn't that clever at the beginning. At first, I thought, imagine if like a falling bullet shot randomly into the air, hit someone in the head and killed them. How would you ever figure out who did it? And that's what I thought I would first do with this story. But then I found all these studies, and there's actually a TV show called Mythbusters that even did it. And so I realized that wouldn't realistically happen. And so then I jumped to what you're talking about, that a murder happens, someone is shot in the head and killed during this bizarre annual tradition. And again, it's not really a spoiler. Ballard pretty quickly figures out that this is not an accidental death. This is intentional.
I'm very protective of your books. I don't want to give anything away. Would you say you seem to be very instinctual how you find stories? There's lots of questions here from your audience about how you come and where you get your ideas, but you seem to just go to the places that instinctually you're just drawn to, right? You don't sort of question it too much. You just go, this is the thing that interests me. I want to write about it.
Well, yeah, I follow my own interests a lot, but I think they might be kind of buffeted or directed by my conversations. I spend time with the kind of people that I want to write about. I have meetings and breakfasts and lunches and dinners and so forth with detectives. And when talking about Mickey Haller, I have a whole cadre of criminal defense lawyers that I talk to. And I'm not there like with a notebook or a recorder. I'm not really obvious about it. I just sit back and people tell stories, and different stories hit me in different ways. And I say, wait a minute, tell me more about that. Or I'll have a follow-up question. And that led me down the road to stories. This murder that we were just talking about, that's very thinly disguised on a real case that one of my Breakfast Club detectives had worked about 12 or 15 years ago. And he talked about it, and I said, well, tell me more. And I got some reports and things like that. And that was the inspiring point of this other half of the cases that Ballard is charged with running with.
Yeah. That's so cool. This is like you're a sponge. You just sort of soak up people and stories, and you seem to love it. You obviously do love it after 36 novels, right? You still feel really passionate about crime and thrillers, and telling stories is sort of the thing that drives you, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's hard to, you do it too. I mean, if you're writing, it's hard to, it's a mystical thing, and I don't want to get all woo woo about it, but where stuff comes from, where inspiration comes from, it can come from the littlest thing or a very big, obvious thing.
Yeah.
All writers are different, but there's writers who are still working out their own trauma, something that happened to them. Like James Ellroy. And then there's people that are more like reportorial type of writers. And I think I'm one of those. I like to throw out the net and see what comes in and see what little thing may inspire me or what big thing is in the net that inspires me.
That's so cool. And it's cool that there's so many different approaches to writing, like you say. There's a few questions here from people. I'd love to read one from Rhea Cleary, who said, and it's on this topic, what is some great advice? What would you give to some people who I think, by the sounds of it, are probably, hard at work on their first novel or maybe their third novel after a few rejections and things like that? But what would you say to them? What would you give as a source of inspiration? Because they're obviously big fans of yours.
Well, I mean, first of all, I hope they're reading. So a lot of people make the mistake of thinking I could write a book, but they haven't. I don't know if study is too strong a word, but they haven't read. They don't know the genre, for example.
Yeah.
And and every now and then I'll be like a, what do you call it, temporary faculty at a writing workshop or something like that, and you can pick that out. There's people that are inspired by what's been written before them, and there's people who have no idea about it. And so I think the key thing is to read. And then if you're going to be a writer, then you got to write. You can't just keep talking about it or thinking about it. Everything's cliche, but cliches are cliches because they work.
Yeah.
And I had a writing teacher way back when I was in the university who said, if you're going to be a writer, you got to write every day, even if it's only for 15 minutes. And that's a key thing. We all have jobs. I had a job, when I was writing novels initially. And sometimes I didn't have a lot of time, but if you write for 15 minutes a day, you'll accumulate words, but more importantly, you won't lose your story. It'll always be churning in your head, and suddenly you'll reach this part of your life where you can't wait for those 15 minutes, and your day job shrinks back.
Yeah.
And you want that 15 minutes, and then it becomes a half hour and so forth, and then you become more dedicated. So I would just say, if you're going to be a writer, then start writing. Never stop reading, and also keep your head down. Write a story that you would like to read. Write a character that you would like to spend time with, and don't look around and say, "Oh, that guy's very successful. He did this, so I'm going to do that." Don't lick your finger and hold it up to the wind. Just keep your head down and pull it out of yourself.
Yeah, I totally mirror that advice as well. Like for me, it was a very long time of writing stuff that I thought people would want to read. And it wasn't until I wrote the book that I actually would enjoy myself that people, for some reason, seemed to actually find engaging. So I totally agree.
You got to believe you're every man or an every woman. And if it's something that you like, there's somebody out there who's going to like it. And maybe there's more than one person. Maybe there's a lot of people. I mean, it's a big world, so the chances are, if you like it, there's going to be people out there who like it too.
That's very good advice. There's a question here from M, and M says this: you've written mainly male lead characters, and I guess that's Mickey and Jack and Bosch, obviously, and now you're writing Renee. What is it like switching to writing a female character? Have you found that that's a distinct difference in how you approach her character, or is it roughly the same for you?
I would say it's roughly the same, but we've already talked about, I have a lot of help.
Yes.
But it's also like I've never written about women before. I wrote a book that was a female lead called Void Moon a long time ago. I have a character named Rachel Walling who's in some Bosch books and a lot of the Jack books, who I've always loved as a character. So it's not like an aberration that I suddenly started writing about Renee Ballard, but I did cover myself because I had this female detective that I was basing it on, who could keep me on the straight and narrow, by reading what I was doing. And that kind of help was really immeasurable. And then on top of it, my wife reads my books very early in manuscript, and then my longtime editor is female. So I have these strong women helping me, and I don't think I could get away with any kind of a false move. I don't see it getting past those women who are the early readers of my books.
Yeah, they're your buffers, like you say.
But then, just to continue a little bit.
Yeah.
But at the bottom line is, I like to write about people, obviously, that they're unique in their own ways, but they're just good at what they do, and they're relentless at what they do, and that's not gender specific. And I think if I keep that line, whether it's a male reader or a female reader, I'll be able to make that kind of empathic connection between, because we all want to be relentless at what we do, and we all want to be good at what we do, and so we admire seeing someone who does it, even if it's in unorthodox ways, you know.
Yeah, sure. In your career, Michael, you spanned, like we've talked about, you spanned 36 novels now, and you're still writing these amazing books. But I was wondering if there are any particular moments or things that have happened to you that have been just the best things. What are some of the best things that have come out of writing books and being a writer in general? What are some of your favorite moments?
Well, there's been a lot, but I mean, like this would be an example how, and I didn't realize this. I mean, I just wanted to write books, and, you know, I've been very fortunate and lucky, and, you know, and these books took me around the world. Like, I know we're on a Zoom now, but we've been together. We've had a discussion in Brisbane, and it's just amazing to me how character and storytelling, you know, knows no bounds. There's no borders, there's no oceans, and that's pretty amazing to be part of that. You know, and then on other levels, just you know, I one of my most fulfilling moments in recent years was when we were filming. Wasn't the first season of Bosch. We never did the books on the TV show in order. We decided what we needed to say, and then chose a book. And so, you know, my first book, The Black Echo, just like any writer, when I was writing it, I had no idea if it would be published. And so, you know, I was having fun doing it. I was having fulfillment, but I also knew maybe my mother and maybe my wife might be the only people who ever read this. And the book starts without Harry Bosch. It has a preface that has about a witness, about a kid who happens to see part of a murder occur.
Yeah.
And then, like, about 25 years after I wrote that scene, I didn't think anyone, or I didn't know whether anyone would ever read. We filmed that scene, and that night, we were filming that, I was just kind of walking around in a daze, thinking, like, this is so surreal, that because I remember I had a big walk-in closet that I had turned into my little writing room. And so something that I produced in that little room is now being filmed many years later. It's just you know, what a long, strange trip it's been.
Yeah, it's so cool. I can imagine that feeling, like you're having hundreds of people all trying to capture this moment that, like you said, was on this little isolated thing, became this big thing that so many people have connected with. There are actually a lot of questions about the Bosch TV show, and I'd love to have a quick chat about that if that's okay with you.
Sure.
One of the questions, and I'm sorry, I've lost who actually asked this question. Let me go back up. But it was about from Jenny. This is from Jenny. Jenny Dare, and she's asked, how have you found Titus's portrayal of Bosch? And I guess then, is it true to the book, or do the show sort of separate itself from the book in a way? Like, where do you frame it, and what have you thought of how Titus Welliver has approached the character?
No, I think he's excellent. I mean, that was one of the lucky breaks I got that we got him, and he's fantastic. I'm about 10 years past him in what I'm writing in the books, so it's a little bit of a disconnect. But I just think he's been pretty amazing. Like, I think a lot of people ask, like, is that who you pictured Harry Bosch? And he's not, but I always say he doesn't look like the guy I've imagined for 30 some years on the outside, but on the inside, he looks just like him. And what I mean is he carries a depth, and he carries a certain sadness and the hint that he's been through some tough times. He projects that without having to say anything. And that has been a key thing. And then, ironically, in the US books, he does the audio.
Yeah.
And I just think his voice is so good. So when I say I don't picture him, it's because I'm writing about a guy who's more than 10 years older than Titus. And when I write my books, but I hear Titus's voice. I think his voice is just so perfect as Harry Bosch. So it's weird that Yeah, he sounds just like him as I hear his voice when I'm writing, but I'm still picturing a guy I kind of formed in my head long before I knew Titus.
I was so excited when I heard he was portraying Bosch, because I'd loved him since Deadwood. I think I'd seen him, and my gosh, he's just been an incredible actor for so long. It feels like Bosch has kind of almost become a signature role for him. Like, he'd done all these other shows and movies and been awesome, but now, like, when people see his face, now they think of Harry Bosch, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he's been a lifelong character actor, and this was really his first lead in anything that's significant. So which is again something that we got lucky with. So it'd be different if he had multiple shows and been a movie star or whatever. This, sort of late in his life. He was, I think, 52 when he got this job. So he treasures it, and that translates into being someone who's just fantastic to work with. And I'm just not talking about me because I'm like one of the bosses. I'm talking about the crew people, all the way down to the people who put out food and stuff. He is connected with all of them. And, every now and then on the set, so it will be the last day for someone, or Titus will feel like he just wants to give a pep talk to everybody, because it's been hard to film during COVID, and like you have to stay in a bubble and you're tested all the time.
Yeah.
And he gives these speeches, and you can just see it in the crew's faces that he's our leader and we'll follow him.
That's so cool. I love hearing that. It's awesome to hear of a Hollywood actor being really generous and thoughtful that way with the crew and stuff. It just speaks volumes of him. And I guess that's what we see too, the humanity of Bosch, right? You get to see that truth in him. And he was the one who actually announced the new Bosch Legacy TV show right this week. Didn't he announce the title? That's just brand new, right?
Yeah, a few days ago. We've already made the first season of the show, but we were doing it without a title. We just kept calling it the Bosch spinoff. And we're plugging away. And IMDb, which is the sister streaming service to Amazon, which is going to be on, they did all that kind of stuff of testing names and titles and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And they came up with Bosch Legacy and announced it this week. So now we already had the show done. Now we have a title.
Works well, doesn't it? And there's lots of questions here about Mickey. Mickey Haller seems to be someone who people just absolutely love. And we've got another Lincoln Lawyer TV show coming up as well. I don't know how you do all this stuff, mate. I don't know what you
what I do is try to surround myself, especially when it's Hollywood stuff, with people I can trust and I know that will safeguard the stories. And I was there for a fair amount of the Lincoln Lawyer show, but it was more. It wasn't like Bosch. It wasn't as time consuming as Bosch has been. Because I didn't have that time, but also because the guy who wanted to make it, David Kelly, has made some fantastic television, and I was feeling okay about handing Haller over, and that's another show that it's wrapped, it's ready to go, and hopefully Netflix will put it out in the early part of the year.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. I'm looking forward to watching that. I just have another quick question on something that I've noticed in all of your work, and in this book, and then in your TV work and your movies and everything that you do, there seems to be this idea of the world being this place that can be really awful, but we have to have hope. We have to have this sense of hope and a fight for the future and for the people who maybe are suffering. Do you feel that every day? Is that something that comes from a deep place in you, or is that just, I don't know, that thematic just seems so personal to me, and it is in such a huge amount of what you do?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think most people probably share that sentiment, but I did want, I think it's the end of my third book, Concrete Blonde, which ends with Bosch, as a lot of the books do, Bosch on his back deck, looking out at the city that he helps protect, and talking about hope, and that's what in dark times, that's what you're left with. And this new book is called The Dark Hours, not just because Ballard works during the middle of the night. It's because these are the dark hours that we've all been going through in the last year. And, it is hope that pulls you through. And, part of the construction of the books was like, from early on, I wanted Bosch to have a back deck where you could look out at the lights of the city and know that every one of those lights is somebody's hope and so forth. And, so that's like a reinforcement of what you very eloquently just said.
It feels like that to me. Like whenever I read the book with Bosch in it, and there's these characters like Renee as well, especially Renee, just going after fighting for people. And it just gives me hope that though this world exists that you present so authentically in your books, there are still people out there who are trying their best to help and serve and protect and do all those good things. And I find your books immensely hopeful.
Well, thanks. I hope they are. And, although they're classified as fiction, we've already talked about this doesn't come out of my head as like some kind of creative genius. I'm inspired by people that have that hope and do these difficult jobs. There's a certain nobility in doing police work well, because it's a very tough job. Look at what's going on in the last year.
Yeah.
And as Renee says that in this book, I think in the first chapter, she's been spat on by people she thought she was helping, and that's the policeman's lot. And many policemen are not good. Police officers are not good. They don't know how to do the job right, or they're corrupted in some way.
Yeah.
But not all of them, and so when you find one that's still willing to fight the good fight, that's so much a part of this book, that malaise and apathy has enveloped the LAPD and probably almost every police department in the United States because of this reckoning. And yet there's Renee wanting to be relentless and be fierce and be undaunted in doing her work, which is doing the right thing.
Yeah, and I relate to it too, because I'm a high school teacher and a father, and even in those capacities of my life, I feel like sometimes you fight so hard to do the right thing and to help people, but you don't necessarily feel like that's seen. You know what I mean? Like people see that you do it, and it sometimes can feel like you're just not actually doing anything meaningful. But then when you read a character like Renee or Bosch or Mickey, and they're these characters who do those things, it makes you feel connected. At least for me, I know I'm going on a bit about this, but I just wanted to, I don't know, I just feel really connected to your books.
That's what, that goes back to your question earlier about the good moments. I mean, what you're saying is exactly true. And there's no borders or boundaries. That's a universal thing that we're all, looking for, hoping for. And, if you can put that into a book and reinforce that in somebody's heart while they're reading the book, then, you've kind of transcended the genre of trying to trick people with who did it. There's much more going on here than that.
I totally agree. We're actually just about out of time, I'm afraid. If you've got any other questions for Michael, I might try to grab one or two more. But can I ask, what do you got next, Michael? What is your next thing? Because the podcast, the books, the TV shows, all these awesome things with your name on them. What are you really diving into now?
Well, I'm this part of the year, I'm on somewhat of a cycle. This is the part of the year where I start the next book. And so that's where the TV shows are all wrapped. There's no production going on. There's no TV writing going on. Right now, all I am right at this moment is a book writer. And, again, no spoilers, but Dark Hours ends with a question of more so than other books, what's next for Renee? And to a lesser degree, what's next for Harry Bosch? And that's what I'm working on. I'm working on a book where that's answered pretty quickly. And as I said earlier, it's a reverse book. It's Bosch looking at Renee, making decisions about her future.
Oh, that's so cool. I'm looking forward to that one. Two more real quick things. There's one from Debbie. I forgot this. Debbie C, thank you for mentioning this. You've got a character in here who's from New South Wales. Who's from Australia. I was so excited to read that.
Tell me more about that. My head's in the new book. I'm trying to remember who you're talking about.
So it was just a little side reference to a character, but it just ended up.
Oh, the guy. Yeah, they pulled over.
It was really cool.
I'm trying to be international.
Yeah. Well, we appreciated the shout out. The last one is this question from Kathy. We'll end with this one from Kathy. Kathy is apparently a new reader, which is really cool that people are still engaging with your work. But here's the question, and I think you've been asked this one before. It's a good one. What if someone's new to you, new to the Michael Connelly extended universe? Where should they start? What should they have as their entry point into? I would say this one would be my thing, and then go back. But what do you say, Michael?
Yeah, it's kind of tough because, as you said, that's the fourth time Renee's out. But also you get better as a writer. So I would not say go to the first book. I'd say two books that come to the surface for me in the last 10 years that I think you get a good take on the characters and what I'm trying to do would be The Wrong Side of Goodbye, which is a Bosch novel, and the first Renee book called The Late Show. And they're still pretty contemporary. They're 5, 6, 7 years old, and I think they would be good introductions to who these characters are, and then you can jump around from there if you want more.
I'm pretty sure actually was my first book was The Wrong Side of Goodbye. That was the first one I read. So yeah, I can attest to you've made a fan in me. So that one definitely worked.
And the new show Bosch Legacy, that's the book that we're the first season's that book. So
I'm excited. I'm excited. All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael. I think we're just about out of time today. I want to just really say a big shout out to everyone in the questions and answers here. You've had so many questions. There's been so many people here out supporting you, and looking forward to getting back and actually seeing you in person again so we can all get it signed and things like that. But thank you so much, Michael, for your time. And I guess I'll invite Suzanne back.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody. And Ben, thanks for the questions and everyone who sent some in.
Thank you so much, Michael and Ben, for such a wonderful conversation. We did have so many questions that we couldn't actually get to them all, but we will be sending.
I tried my best.
You did. You did really well. You did really well.
Thank you.
We will be sending all your comments and questions to Michael. So thank you, everyone, for attending. We'll be sending a link to the recording soon. And we hope to see you at our final event next Wednesday with Fiona McIntosh. But farewell for now. Thank you very much for attending. And thank you again, Michael and Ben.